My dear soul, there is a peculiar suffering that visits the human heart in the quiet hours, a suffering that the world cannot easily see or measure. It is not the pain of standing still, not the agony of obvious failure, but something far more subtle and confounding. It is the deep unrest that comes when you are moving forward, when your feet are walking the path, when your hands are busy with tasks, when your days are filled with activity and purpose. And yet within your chest, something whispers that you are trapped. Something insists that despite all this motion, you remain fundamentally stuck. You know this feeling, do you not? You wake each morning and fulfill your duties. You attend to your work, your relationships, your responsibilities. You make plans and execute them. You cross items off lists. You achieve small victories. And yet, when the night comes and you lie down in the darkness, there is a weight upon your being that will not lift. There is a sense that for all your movement through the world, you have not moved at all in the direction that truly matters. The wheels turn, but the chariot of your soul seems anchored to some invisible stake driven deep into the earth of your consciousness. This is not laziness speaking. This is not the voice of someone who has given up or who refuses to try. No, my friend, this is often the cry of the most sincere among us, the ones who are genuinely striving, the ones who have not abandoned their journey but who feel, despite their honest efforts, that they are walking in place. It is the frustration of the warrior who swings the sword with all their might, only to find it cuts only air and illusion, never reaching the true battle that rages within. Krishna speaks to us across the ages about this very condition, though we rarely recognize it when we first encounter the Bhagavad Gita. We read of Arjuna on the battlefield and we think, ah yes, this is about duty and action and war. But look deeper, beloved seeker. Arjuna is not stuck because he lacks a path forward. The path is clear. The enemy is before him. The battle is inevitable. He is stuck because something within him has created a resistance so profound that even though he stands ready, even though he is capable, even though the moment for action has arrived, he cannot move. His bow falls from his hands not because he is weak, but because an inner paralysis has gripped him more completely than any outer obstacle ever could. This inner resistance, this invisible force that holds us motionless while we are in motion, is one of the great mysteries of human experience. You can be progressing in your career and feel stuck. You can be deepening your relationships and feel stuck. You can be learning, growing, expanding your life in measurable ways and still feel fundamentally, essentially stuck. And the tragedy is that this feeling often intensifies precisely when you are doing what you are supposed to do, when you are being responsible, when you are meeting the world's expectations and even your own. Why does this happen? Why does the soul feel bound even as the body moves freely through space and time? Why does the heart feel heavy even when circumstances are not obviously dire? This question is not answered by psychology alone, nor by mere positive thinking, nor by working harder or faster or more efficiently. The answer lies deeper than the surface mind can reach. It lies in the realm where Krishna teaches, in that subtle space where the eternal self encounters the machinery of material existence, where the infinite consciousness finds itself seemingly trapped in the finite. Consider for a moment the nature of true stuckness. When a wheel is stuck in mud, we understand the problem immediately. The obstacle is visible. The solution is clear. Remove the mud, add traction, apply force. But when the soul is stuck, there is no mud we can see, no visible obstacle to remove. The resistance is not out there in the world. The resistance is the very fabric of how we are engaging with the world. It is woven into our desires, our attachments, our identifications, our fears. We are stuck not because the path is blocked, but because we are pulling in two directions simultaneously. Because we are saying yes with our actions and no with our being. This is the battlefield that Krishna illuminates, not the external battlefield of Kurukshetra, though that serves as the perfect metaphor, but the internal battlefield where duty meets desire, where action meets attachment, where movement meets the desperate clinging to outcomes. And on this battlefield, my dear friend, we fight every single day, often without knowing we are fighting at all. You see, the mind is a strange instrument, perhaps the strangest in all of creation. It can hold contradictions with such ease that we do not even notice we are living inside a paradox. You can want something desperately and simultaneously fear its arrival. You can move toward a goal while unconsciously sabotaging your own progress. You can speak words of confidence while your deeper consciousness trembles with doubt. And in this split condition, in this state of internal division, the soul experiences itself as stuck, because in truth, it is stuck between its own opposing forces, caught in the crossfire of its own conflicting intentions. When Krishna speaks to Arjuna about the nature of action, he is not simply giving instructions on how to fight a war. He is revealing something far more fundamental about the human condition. He is showing us that action itself is not the problem. Movement is not the problem. Engagement with the world is not the problem. The problem is the quality of consciousness that we bring to our actions, the invisible strings of attachment and expectation that we tie to everything we do, the way we mortgage our peace to outcomes we cannot control, the manner in which we make our inner stability dependent on external results. This is why you can be moving forward and feel stuck. Because true movement, the kind that liberates the soul, is not measured in external progress alone. It is measured in the degree of inner freedom you experience while making that progress. You can climb a mountain and remain imprisoned. You can sit perfectly still and be absolutely free. The motion of the body through space tells us nothing about the motion of consciousness through its own liberation. And it is this liberation of consciousness, this untangling of the self from its own bondage, that Krishna is always pointing toward, in every verse, in every teaching, in every moment of his divine instruction. Think about the last time you accomplished something significant. Perhaps you completed a difficult project or reached a milestone you had been working toward for months or years. In the moment of achievement, there may have been satisfaction, even joy. But how long did it last? How quickly did the mind move on to the next thing, the next lack, the next mountain to climb? And in that restless movement, in that inability to rest in accomplishment, do you see the mechanism of your stuckness? The mind that cannot rest in what is, that cannot be present to its own existence without constantly reaching for something else, is a mind that will feel stuck no matter how much it achieves, because its very structure is one of perpetual dissatisfaction. The ancient texts call this Trishna, this thirst that cannot be quenched, this craving that feeds on its own fulfillment and grows hungrier with every satisfaction. It is not that we should not have goals or work toward things. It is not that ambition itself is the enemy. But when our goals become the prison guards of our peace, when our ambitions become the chains that bind us to anxiety and restlessness, when our very movement forward is powered by a desperate escape from what we fear rather than a joyful expression of what we are, then we have entered into that peculiar hell of being busy but bound, of being active but imprisoned, of moving forward while feeling utterly, completely stuck. And here is where the teaching becomes both beautiful and challenging, where Krishna asks something of us that the ordinary mind finds almost impossible to comprehend. He asks us to act without attachment to the fruits of action. He asks us to move through the world with full engagement and zero dependence. He asks us to care deeply about what we do while remaining unshaken by what results from what we do. To the mind trained in the logic of cause and effect, of effort and reward, of investment and return, this sounds like madness. How can I work toward something without caring about the outcome? How can I engage fully without attachment? Is this not a contradiction? But it is only a contradiction to the surface mind, to the calculating intelligence that knows only the mathematics of gain and loss. To the deeper self, to the Atman that Krishna constantly reminds us we truly are, this is not contradiction but liberation. This is the secret of being in the world but not of it, of playing the game with full intensity while knowing it is a game, of taking your role seriously while never forgetting that you are not merely the role. This is how you move forward without getting stuck, how you engage without becoming entangled, how you live with passion without becoming enslaved by your own passions. The resistance you feel, that sense of being stuck even while moving, is often the friction between these two levels of your being. The surface self is doing what it thinks it should do, following the script it has been given, pursuing the goals it has been taught to pursue. But the deeper self, that witnessing consciousness that Krishna calls the eternal seer, knows that something is false in this arrangement. It knows that you are playing a game whose rules were written by fear and desire, by social conditioning and unconscious patterns. And this deeper knowing creates a drag on your forward motion, a heaviness in your being, a sense that something is profoundly wrong even when everything appears to be going right. Listen closely now, my dear friend, for we must go deeper into this mystery of inner resistance, this invisible force that holds you even as you move. You must understand that what you are experiencing is not a personal failing, not a sign of weakness, not evidence that you are broken or insufficient. No, what you are experiencing is actually the beginning of awakening. Though it does not feel like awakening at all, it feels like suffering, it feels like confusion. It feels like you are failing at the very basics of human existence, unable to feel satisfied even when you're doing everything you're supposed to do. But Krishna would have you see this differently. He would have you recognize that this discomfort, this friction, this sense of being stuck while moving is actually your consciousness beginning to rebel against the false foundations upon which you have built your life. It is your deeper self refusing to be satisfied by the shallow victories that once seemed so important. It is the eternal within you growing restless with the games of the temporary. And yes, this growth feels like stuckness because you have not yet learned to interpret the signals your own being is sending you. The world has taught you to measure progress in external terms. More money, more status, more achievements, more experiences, more possessions, more recognition. And you have internalized these measurements so deeply that you do not even question them anymore. You simply accept that if you are acquiring these things, you must be moving forward. If you are checking boxes and reaching milestones, you must be progressing. But the soul, that unchanging witness within, does not speak the language of accumulation. It does not measure its journey in the currency of the external world. And so a terrible gap opens up between what you are achieving and what you are actually experiencing, between where you appear to be going and where you feel yourself to be. This gap, this distance between outer success and inner peace is where the feeling of stuckness lives. You look at your life from the outside and you can see the progress. You can list the accomplishments. You can point to the ways you have grown and changed and moved forward. But when you turn inward, when you sit with yourself in the quiet moments, there is no corresponding sense of arrival, no feeling of having gotten anywhere that matters. And this creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that the mind cannot easily resolve. If I am moving forward, why do I feel this way? If I am doing what I'm supposed to do, why is there no peace? The answer, though the mind resists it, is that you have been moving in directions that do not align with your deepest nature. You have been pursuing goals that were never truly yours to begin with. You have been climbing ladders that are leaning against the wrong walls, and your soul knows this even when your conscious mind does not. Your soul knows that all this busyness, all this achievement, all this forward motion is still just rearranging furniture in a house that is not your home. And so it refuses to celebrate, refuses to rest, refuses to grant you the peace you seek, because to do so would be to collude in the delusion, to confirm the lie that you are moving in the right direction when in truth you are simply moving. Krishna speaks of this when he talks about the three gunas, the three fundamental qualities that govern all of material existence. Tamas, the quality of inertia and darkness. Rajas, the quality of passion and restless activity. Sattva, the quality of harmony and clarity. Most people, when they feel stuck in tamas, believe that the solution is to move into rajas, to become more active, more driven, more busy. And so they do. They fill their days with activity. They pursue goals with intensity. They move, believing that motion itself will break the spell of stuckness. But what they discover, often to their great dismay, is that rajas, for all its motion and energy, can be just as much a trap as tamas. The wheel spinning in mud is moving, yes, but it is not going anywhere. The mind racing with plans and worries and ambitions is active, yes, but it is not free. You can be in constant motion and still be completely stuck, because the stuckness is not about the absence of movement. It is about the quality of consciousness that underlies the movement. It is about whether your actions are arising from clarity and freedom or from fear and compulsion. This is why so many people in the modern world, especially those who are successful by conventional standards, report feeling empty, anxious, trapped. They have done everything right according to the script they were given. They have worked hard, achieved much, accumulated wealth and status and recognition. They are moving forward constantly, always busy, always productive, always progressing toward the next goal. And yet there is no peace. There is no sense of having arrived anywhere meaningful. There is only the endless treadmill of more, the perpetual dissatisfaction that comes from feeding a hunger that grows with every meal. You see, the ego, that false sense of separate self that we have constructed and defended and identified with, operates on a very simple principle. It believes that it will be complete when it acquires enough of the right things. Enough success, enough love, enough security, enough validation. It is always reaching for the next thing that will finally make it whole. And so it drives you forward, constantly, relentlessly, promising that just around the next corner, just after the next achievement, just when you reach that next milestone, then you will feel complete. Then you will be able to rest. Then you will be free from this nagging sense of lack. But this is the great lie, the fundamental delusion that keeps you trapped in the cycle of suffering that the ancient wisdom calls samsara. The ego can never be completed because it is itself the incompleteness. It is the sense of separation that creates the feeling of lack in the first place. Trying to satisfy the ego through achievement is like trying to fill a hole by digging it deeper. Every success just reveals another level of insufficiency. Every arrival just shows you how far you still have to go. The finish line keeps moving because there is no finish line. The game is rigged from the beginning. And yet you play. You play because everyone around you is playing. You play because you do not know what else to do. You play because sometimes, for brief moments, the game gives you what feels like rewards, little hits of satisfaction or pleasure or relief that seem to justify all the effort. But these moments pass so quickly, and then you are back in the familiar state of reaching, striving, pursuing, never quite getting there, never quite feeling the peace you are seeking. This is the inner resistance that Krishna is pointing to when he teaches about detachment. The resistance is not out there in the world. The resistance is in the very structure of how you are relating to the world. You are resisting the present moment by constantly reaching for a future moment when things will finally be okay. You are resisting your own being by believing that you are not enough as you are, that you need to become something else, acquire something else, achieve something else before you can be at peace. And this resistance, this fundamental non-acceptance of what is, creates a friction in your consciousness that you experience as being stuck. The great irony is that the more you try to escape this stuckness through achievement and activity, the more stuck you become. Because every action that arises from the belief that you are insufficient, that you are incomplete, that you need to be somewhere other than where you are, actually reinforces the very pattern that is keeping you trapped. You are trying to solve the problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. You are trying to find freedom through the very mechanisms of bondage. So what is the way out? How does one break free from this cycle of moving forward while feeling stuck? The answer is not to stop moving. It is not to abandon your duties or your goals or your engagement with the world. Krishna does not ask Arjuna to leave the battlefield. He asks him to fight. But he asks him to fight from a completely different understanding of who he is and why he is fighting. He asks him to act from a place of inner freedom rather than inner compulsion, from clarity rather than confusion, from love rather than fear. This shift in consciousness, this transformation in the very ground of your being is not something you can achieve through more effort in the conventional sense. You cannot force yourself into freedom. You cannot strive your way into peace. This is perhaps the most difficult thing for the modern mind to accept, because we have been trained to believe that everything worth having must be earned through effort, that every problem has a solution that can be reached through sufficient application of will and determination. But the freedom Krishna speaks of is not a destination you arrive at through a journey of accumulation. It is a recognition of something that has always been present, something you have been carrying within you all along but have forgotten how to see. Think of it this way, my dear friend. Imagine you are wearing glasses that distort everything you look at, making the world appear fragmented and threatening and insufficient. You spend your whole life trying to fix the world, to rearrange it, to make it finally look the way you think it should look so that you can feel at peace. You work tirelessly at this task, moving from one project to another, one relationship to another, one achievement to another, always believing that the next change in external circumstances will finally bring the clarity and peace you seek. But the problem is not out there in the world. The problem is the glasses you are wearing, the lens of perception through which you are filtering all of reality. The stuckness you feel, even while moving forward, is a result of looking at your life through a distorted lens and then trying to fix what you see rather than questioning the lens itself. You are addressing symptoms rather than causes, rearranging the surface of your experience while the deep structure that creates your experience remains untouched and unexamined. And so nothing fundamentally changes. You move from one situation to another, but you bring the same consciousness with you, the same patterns of thinking and feeling and perceiving. And so you recreate the same essential experience in different forms. Krishna speaks directly to this when he teaches about the field and the knower of the field. The field is all of your experience, everything that happens to you, all the circumstances and situations and events that make up your life. The knower of the field is the consciousness that witnesses all of this, the awareness that is present to every experience but is not itself changed by any experience. Most people identify completely with the field. They believe they are their thoughts, their emotions, their circumstances, their roles, their achievements, their failures. And so they spend all their energy trying to control and manipulate the field, trying to make the contents of their experience match some ideal they have constructed in their minds. But Krishna invites you to shift your identity from the field to the knower of the field, from the changing contents of consciousness to consciousness itself. This is not an intellectual exercise. This is not about adopting a new belief system or philosophy. This is about a direct recognition of your own nature, a seeing through the illusion of separation that has kept you trapped in the endless cycle of seeking and never finding, of moving forward but never arriving. When you begin to rest in the awareness of awareness itself, something extraordinary happens. The desperate quality that has been driving all your activity begins to dissolve, not because you have satisfied all your desires, but because you have recognized that the deepest desire, the desire for wholeness and completion and peace, cannot be satisfied by anything in the field of experience. It can only be recognized as already present in the knower, in the consciousness that you truly are, in that eternal witness that has been observing this whole drama of seeking and striving without ever being touched by it. This is why you can be moving forward and feel stuck, because the part of you that is moving forward is the surface self, the constructed identity, the ego that believes in the story of incompleteness and is always trying to complete itself through acquisition and achievement. But the deeper part of you, the true self that Krishna calls the Atman, knows that all this movement is happening within a dream, that none of it touches what you really are, and that no amount of success in the dream will wake you up from the dream. And this deeper knowing creates resistance, creates that sense of something being wrong even when everything appears to be going right. The resistance is actually grace, though it does not feel like grace. It is your own being refusing to be satisfied by the false, refusing to settle for the shallow, refusing to believe the lie that you are what you appear to be, and that happiness can be found in the realm of appearances. This resistance is like a thorn that has been placed in your heart by reality itself, by the truth of what you are, and it will not let you rest in delusion no matter how comfortable that delusion might seem. So many spiritual seekers make the mistake of trying to get rid of this resistance, of treating it as an obstacle to be overcome. They want to feel good all the time, to be positive and motivated and enthusiastic about their goals. They see the inner friction, the sense of stuckness, as something wrong that needs to be fixed, and so they apply more techniques, more practices, more strategies for feeling better. They affirm and visualize and meditate, all in service of getting rid of the discomfort, of returning to a state where they can pursue their goals without this nagging sense that something is fundamentally off. But what if the discomfort is not the problem? What if the discomfort is actually the beginning of the solution? What if that sense of stuckness, that inner resistance, that feeling that something is wrong even when everything is right, is actually your consciousness trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that you have been living in a way that is out of alignment with your deepest truth? What if, instead of trying to overcome the resistance, you need to listen to it, to let it show you something about the false foundations upon which you have been building your life? This requires tremendous courage because it means being willing to question everything, to look at the goals you have been pursuing and ask whether they are really your goals or just goals you adopted from your culture, your family, your conditioning. It means being willing to sit with the possibility that much of what you have been working toward, much of what you have been proud of accomplishing, might not actually be serving your deepest evolution. It means being willing to feel the full weight of the existential confusion that comes when you stop running from it long enough to actually face it. And this is where most people turn back. This is where the seeking becomes too uncomfortable, too threatening to the familiar structures of identity and purpose. It is one thing to want to feel better while continuing to live basically the same life. It is quite another thing to allow your entire understanding of who you are and what you are here to do to be called into question. Most people, when they reach this edge, retreat back into the familiar patterns, back into the busyness and the goals and the forward motion, even if that motion feels empty. Because at least it is familiar, at least they know how to do it, at least it gives them something to hold on to in a universe that otherwise seems terrifyingly uncertain. But you, my friend, if you are still here, still listening to these words, still willing to sit with this discomfort rather than running from it, you are different. Something in you is ready for a deeper truth, even if that truth dismantles everything you thought you knew. Something in you is tired of the half-life, the going through the motions, the achieving without fulfillment. Something in you wants to know what lies beyond the endless cycle of desire and satisfaction and renewed desire, beyond the treadmill of becoming that never leads to being. And this is where Krishna meets you, not in your success, not in your failure, but in your willingness to be honest about the suffering inherent in both, in your readiness to see through the game you have been playing, in your capacity to bear the truth that all your forward motion has been taking place within a dream, and that what you truly seek cannot be found in any direction because it is not located in space or time. It is what you are, right now, beneath all the layers of conditioning and confusion, beneath all the stories of lack and incompleteness, beneath all the striving and seeking that has defined your existence up until this very moment. And so we arrive at the heart of the paradox, the place where words begin to fail but understanding deepens, where the mind's usual strategies for grasping truth must give way to something more direct, more immediate, more alive. You feel stuck even while moving forward because you have been taught to locate yourself in the movement rather than in the stillness that witnesses the movement. You have been trained to identify with the actor rather than the awareness within which all action takes place. And this misidentification creates a kind of existential vertigo, a sense of being nowhere even while being everywhere, of missing something essential even while accumulating everything superficial. Listen now with the ear of your heart, not the ear of your calculating mind. What Krishna reveals to Arjuna on that battlefield is not a strategy for better action, though it includes guidance about action. What he reveals is the secret of being, the truth that dissolves the very question of stuckness, because it shows you that there is nowhere to go and nothing to achieve that would make you more whole than you already are in this moment. But the mind cannot accept this. The mind, trained in the logic of progress and improvement, recoils from such a teaching. If there is nowhere to go, why do anything? If I am already complete, why does everything feel so incomplete? These questions arise from a fundamental misunderstanding, from confusing the absolute truth of your nature with the relative reality of your experience. Yes, in your deepest being, in the consciousness that you truly are, you are already whole, already free, already at peace. This is not something you need to achieve, it is what you are. But this wholeness is obscured by layers of conditioning, by habitual patterns of thinking and feeling, by the accumulated weight of believing yourself to be a separate self that must protect and promote and perfect itself in order to survive and thrive in a hostile universe. And these layers are very real in your experience, even though they are ultimately unreal in your nature. So the work, if we can call it work, is not about becoming something you are not. It is about removing the obstacles to recognizing what you already are. It is about seeing through the illusions that keep you trapped in the experience of incompleteness, even though your true nature is complete. And this seeing is not something you can force. You cannot decide to see through an illusion by an act of will. The very effort to see through it often reinforces it, because the one who is trying to see through the illusion is itself part of the illusion. The ego trying to transcend itself, which is like a hand trying to grasp itself. This is why you feel stuck, because you are trying to solve the problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. You are trying to find freedom through the mechanisms of bondage. You are trying to achieve peace through the very activity of seeking that prevents peace. And the more you try, the more exhausted you become, the more frustrated, the more convinced that something must be wrong with you because everyone else seems to be making progress. And you alone are spinning your wheels, going through the motions without arriving anywhere that feels real. But what if nothing is wrong with you? What if this feeling of stuckness is actually a sign that you are beginning to wake up, that your consciousness is starting to question the assumptions that have governed your life, that the deeper intelligence within you is refusing to be satisfied by the superficial rewards that once seemed so important. What if the resistance you feel is not resistance to your progress, but resistance to continuing in a direction that was never aligned with your truth in the first place? The Bhagavad Gita speaks of dharma, that untranslatable word that points to your essential nature, your true purpose, the unique way that the divine expresses itself through your particular form and personality and circumstances. And it teaches that there is great danger in trying to live someone else's dharma, no matter how well you do it, because it will never bring you the peace that comes from living in alignment with your own truth. Better to fail at your own dharma, Krishna says, than to succeed at someone else's, because success in the wrong direction is the most dangerous failure of all. It gives you the appearance of progress while actually taking you further from yourself. Could it be that you feel stuck because you have been succeeding at someone else's dharma? Could it be that all this forward motion, all these achievements, all this busy activity has been in service of goals and values that were never truly yours to begin with? Could it be that what you call stuckness is actually your soul's refusal to continue in a direction that violates your deepest truth, even if that direction appears successful by every external measure? These are not comfortable questions. They threaten the entire structure of meaning you have built, the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and what you are doing here. But they must be asked if you are to break free from the cycle of moving without arriving, of achieving without fulfillment, of being busy without being alive. They must be asked because the answer to your stuckness does not lie in moving faster or trying harder or finding better strategies for success. It lies in pausing long enough to question whether the direction you are moving in is actually the direction your soul wants to go. And this pause, this sacred stopping, this willingness to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, is perhaps the most important thing you can do. Not because it gives you immediate answers, but because it creates the space for a different kind of knowing to emerge, a knowing that does not come from thinking or analyzing or figuring out, but from a deeper listening, a tuning in to the quiet voice of your own being that has been trying to get your attention all along, but has been drowned out by the noise of your busyness and your striving and your endless mental commentary about what you should be doing and where you should be going. In this pause, in this sacred stopping, you begin to notice something strange. The world does not fall apart when you stop pushing. The sky does not collapse when you stop holding it up. Life continues. Breath continues, awareness continues, even when you are not controlling and managing and trying to make everything happen. And in this noticing, a possibility begins to dawn, faint at first, easily dismissed, but growing stronger the more you rest in it. The possibility that perhaps you have never been the doer you thought you were, that perhaps all this action you have been taking credit for has been arising from sources much deeper than your conscious will. That perhaps the sense of being a separate self in control of your life has itself been the fundamental illusion keeping you trapped in the experience of stuckness. This is the great teaching that runs through all of Krishna's words to Arjuna, the teaching that action can happen through you without being done by you, that you can engage fully with life without being bound by the illusion of personal doership. And when this truth is not just understood intellectually but lived experientially, everything changes. Not because your circumstances change, though they might. Not because you suddenly start achieving different things, though you might. But because the quality of your relationship to everything changes. You are no longer moving forward in order to get somewhere. You are simply moving, and the movement itself is complete, whole, sufficient, because it is not arising from a sense of lack, but from the fullness of being itself. But how do you arrive at this place? This way of being where action flows from fullness rather than lack? The question itself reveals the trap, because you cannot arrive at what you already are. You cannot reach presence through future planning. You cannot achieve being through more becoming. And yet the mind keeps asking how, keeps looking for the technique, the method, the step-by-step process that will deliver you from the prison of stuckness into the freedom you long for. This is the mind doing what it has always done, trying to solve a problem of being with strategies of doing, trying to find peace through the very mechanism that prevents peace. Krishna understood this completely. He saw that Arjuna was caught not just in confusion about what action to take, but in a much deeper confusion about the nature of action itself, about who or what is acting, about the relationship between consciousness and activity. And so his teaching had to address not just the surface question of whether to fight or not to fight, but the fundamental question of what it means to act at all, what it means to be a human being moving through this world of apparent choices and consequences while simultaneously resting in the unchanging awareness that witnesses all choice and all consequence without being touched by any of it. This is the paradox you must learn to hold, my dear friend. Not resolve, but hold. Not figure out, but live within. You are both the actor and the witness, both the mover and the stillness, both the one who experiences stuckness and the awareness that observes the experience of stuckness without being stuck. And the suffering comes from collapsing these two dimensions into one, from identifying exclusively with the actor while forgetting the witness, from believing you are only the movement while losing touch with the stillness that makes all movement possible. When you identify only with the actor, with the one who is trying to move forward and achieve and accomplish, you inevitably feel stuck whenever the results do not match your expectations, whenever the progress is not fast enough or visible enough or satisfying enough, because the actor is always measuring, always comparing, always evaluating whether things are going well or badly, whether you are succeeding or failing, whether you are where you should be or falling behind. This constant measurement creates a chronic sense of insufficiency because there is always more to achieve, always further to go, always some gap between where you are and where you think you should be. But when you remember the witness, when you touch the dimension of your being that is simply aware of all this activity without being defined by it, something softens, not because the challenges disappear or the circumstances suddenly become easier, but because there is space around the experience, breathing room, a sense of perspective that allows you to see that this moment of apparent stuckness is just one small wave in an infinite ocean of consciousness, one passing weather pattern in the vast sky of your being. The witness does not deny what the actor is experiencing. It does not pretend that the frustration and confusion are not real, but it holds them within a larger context, a context of unshakable peace that exists prior to and independent of any particular experience. This is what Krishna means when he speaks of equanimity, of remaining steady in success and failure, pleasure and pain, gain and loss. He is not asking you to become emotionally numb or indifferent to life. He is pointing you toward a quality of consciousness that can feel everything fully while not being defined by anything, that can engage completely with the drama of existence while knowing itself to be the stage on which the drama unfolds rather than just a character in the play. And from this quality of consciousness, action becomes something entirely different. It is no longer driven by the desperate need to fix yourself or complete yourself or prove yourself. It arises spontaneously from your connection to the whole, from your attunement to what this moment is asking of you, from a place of responsiveness rather than reactivity. But you cannot think your way into this consciousness. You cannot analyze yourself into equanimity. The mind, with all its brilliant capacity for understanding and figuring out, is not the tool for this transformation. The mind is what got you stuck in the first place, with its constant commentary and judgment and comparison, with its insistence on knowing where you are going and how you are doing and whether you are making progress. The mind is a beautiful servant but a terrible master, and when it becomes the master of your life, when you mistake its voice for your own deepest truth, you end up trapped in exactly the kind of stuckness you are experiencing now. Moving through the motions but never touching the meaning, achieving the goals but missing the point. So what is required is not more thinking but a fundamental shift in the center of gravity of your consciousness, a movement from living in your head to living in your whole being, from identifying with the voice of thought to resting in the silence that contains all thought. And this shift happens not through effort but through surrender, not through doing but through allowing, not through grasping but through releasing. It happens when you finally become tired enough of the struggle, exhausted enough by the endless trying, that you stop. Not because you have given up, but because you have seen through the futility of trying to force yourself into a freedom that can only be received as grace. This is perhaps the most challenging teaching for the modern seeker to accept, this idea that the deepest transformation cannot be achieved through personal will. We have been so thoroughly conditioned to believe in the power of effort, in the virtue of trying hard, in the necessity of making things happen through the force of our determination. And this conditioning serves us well in many domains of life, in learning skills and building things and accomplishing external goals. But when it comes to the transformation of consciousness itself, this approach becomes the obstacle. You cannot will yourself into surrender. You cannot effort your way into effortlessness. You cannot make peace happen through the very activity that prevents peace. And so you arrive at an impossible place, a place where everything you have learned about how to succeed in life suddenly does not apply, where all your strategies and techniques and methods fail, where the very trying keeps you trapped in the problem you are trying to solve. This is the dark night that many seekers encounter and few are willing to fully enter, because it requires a kind of death, a dissolution of everything you thought you knew about how to be a person in the world. It requires letting go of the illusion of control, releasing the belief that you are the author of your life, surrendering the cherished image of yourself as the one who makes things happen through the power of your will. But this death is not an ending. It is a passage, a threshold, a doorway into a completely different way of being. On the other side of this surrender, you discover that life lives you, that consciousness moves through you, that action happens of its own accord without requiring the constant intervention of a separate self trying to control and manage everything. You discover that you can relax into the flow of existence without collapsing into passivity, that you can let go of control without losing your capacity to respond, that you can trust the intelligence of life itself to move through you in ways that are far more creative and effective than anything your limited personal will could devise. This is the secret that Krishna shares with Arjuna when he speaks of becoming an instrument of the divine, of offering all action as sacrifice, of releasing attachment to the fruits while remaining fully engaged with the task. He is describing a state of consciousness in which you are completely present and active and responsive, but you are no longer acting from the contracted sense of being a separate self that must protect and promote itself. You are acting from wholeness, from the recognition that you are not separate from the totality of existence, that your true nature is not the small self that feels stuck, but the vast consciousness that contains all experience of stuckness and freedom alike. And from this consciousness, the question of whether you are stuck or moving forward loses its urgency, because you're no longer measuring your worth or your progress or your value based on external markers of achievement. You are simply here, present to what is, responsive to what arises, trusting that even this moment of apparent stuckness is exactly where you need to be for your deepest evolution, not because you have resigned yourself to suffering, but because you have seen that resistance to what is creates far more suffering than the actual circumstances themselves ever could. This seeing changes everything, though it changes nothing. The circumstances of your life remain the same. The challenges do not magically disappear. The situations that once triggered frustration and confusion still arise. But your relationship to all of it transforms, and this transformation is not cosmetic or superficial. It is fundamental, radical, a complete reorientation of your being from the inside out. Where once you met each moment with the question, "What does this mean about me?" you now meet it with simple presence, with curiosity, with a willingness to be, with what is without immediately needing to categorize it as good or bad, progress or setback, success or failure. This is the freedom that Krishna speaks of. And it is not freedom from your life, but freedom within your life. Freedom to engage fully with everything that arises without being imprisoned by the belief that any of it defines your essential worth or determines your ultimate destination. You begin to see that the feeling of being stuck was never about your actual circumstances, but about the story you were telling yourself about your circumstances, the meaning you were assigning to them, the way you were using them as evidence for or against your fundamental okayness as a human being. And when you stop doing that, when you stop using your life as proof of whether you are winning or losing at existence, something extraordinary happens. The energy that was bound up in resistance and judgment and self-criticism becomes available for simple engagement with what is actually here. You discover that you have far more capacity than you realized, not because you have become stronger or more capable, but because you're no longer wasting enormous amounts of energy fighting against reality, wishing things were different, believing that you should be somewhere other than where you are. This is not positive thinking. This is not pretending that everything is fine when it is not. This is a much more honest and direct relationship with reality, one that acknowledges difficulty without adding layers of psychological suffering on top of the actual challenge. There is pain in life, yes, there is loss and disappointment and struggle. These are part of the human experience, unavoidable aspects of living in a world of constant change where nothing remains fixed, and everything you love will eventually transform or disappear. But the suffering you feel when you are stuck, that particular quality of anguish and frustration and despair, that comes not from the actual circumstances, but from your resistance to them, from your insistence that they should be different, from your belief that their existence means something terrible about you. Krishna saw this so clearly in Arjuna, this tendency of the human mind to create suffering through resistance to what is. Arjuna stood on that battlefield facing an impossible situation, a genuine dilemma with no easy answer. And his suffering came not just from the difficulty of the choice, but from his resistance to the fact that he had to make such a choice at all. He wanted the universe to be different, to have arranged things so that he did not have to face this particular challenge. And his resistance to what was actually happening created a paralysis that was far more painful than any action he might take. And this is your situation as well, my dear friend, though your battlefield looks different. You are facing circumstances that are genuinely challenging, questions that do not have simple answers, choices that involve real complexity and consequence. But the feeling of being stuck does not come primarily from the difficulty of your situation. It comes from your resistance to the fact that this is your situation, from your wish that you were somewhere else, someone else, facing different challenges or no challenges at all. It comes from the gap between how you think your life should be and how it actually is. And that gap is maintained entirely by thought, by the mind's constant comparison between what is and what should be. When you see this, really see it not just as an interesting idea, but as a living truth in your direct experience, you can begin to relax the resistance. Not because you have decided to accept things, because decision and acceptance are still activities of the ego trying to manage experience. But because you have seen that the resistance itself is optional, that it is something you are doing rather than something that is being done to you, and that you can stop doing it not through effort, but through simple recognition of its futility. This recognition does not come all at once. It is not a one-time realization that solves everything forever. It is more like a gradual awakening, a slow dawn that happens through countless small moments of seeing, of catching yourself in the act of resistance and choosing presence instead, of noticing the contraction and allowing it to soften, of meeting the difficulty of the moment without adding the extra layer of difficulty that comes from believing it should not be here. Each time you do this, each time you choose presence over resistance, you weaken the habitual pattern just a little. You create a small opening for a different way of being. And over time, these small openings accumulate. The moments of presence become more frequent, more stable, more accessible, even in the midst of challenge. You begin to trust that you can meet whatever arises without collapsing, without fragmenting, without losing yourself in the drama of it all. You begin to discover a kind of inner stability that does not depend on circumstances being a certain way, a ground of being that remains steady even when everything on the surface is turbulent and uncertain. This is what it means to be established in the self, as the Gita teaches, to find your center not in the changing conditions of your life, but in the unchanging awareness that witnesses all change. And from this center, action becomes possible again, but it is a different kind of action, not driven by the desperate need to escape what is but arising naturally from your clear seeing of what the moment requires. You stop moving forward in order to get away from where you are and start moving simply because movement is what is arising. Because this is what life is asking of you right now, because action itself becomes an expression of your wholeness rather than a strategy for achieving it. But you cannot skip to this place. You cannot bypass the difficult work of seeing through your own resistance, of recognizing the ways you create suffering through your relationship to your experience rather than through the experience itself. This seeing requires a willingness to look honestly at yourself, to notice the subtle and not so subtle ways you argue with reality, the ways you insist that things should be different, the ways you use your circumstances as evidence that something is wrong with you or your life or the universe itself. And this honest looking is not comfortable. It reveals the ways you have been complicit in your own stuckness, the ways you have held on to suffering because it felt familiar, or because it gave you something to struggle against, or because letting it go would require you to step into an unknown way of being that feels vulnerable and uncertain. It shows you that at some level you have been choosing stuckness, not consciously or deliberately, but through the accumulated weight of habitual patterns that keep recreating the same experience even as you consciously long for something different. This recognition can be humbling, even painful, because it means you cannot simply blame your circumstances or other people or bad luck for the feeling of being trapped. It means you must take responsibility not for causing your situation, but for how you are meeting your situation, for the quality of consciousness you are bringing to each moment, for the choice between presence and resistance that is always available even when it does not feel like a choice at all. And taking this responsibility is not about guilt or self-blame. It is about empowerment, about recognizing that if you have been participating in creating your own stuckness, however unconsciously, then you also have the capacity to participate in creating your own freedom. This is the turning point, the hinge upon which everything pivots. When you stop waiting for circumstances to change in order to feel free and start recognizing that freedom is available right now through a shift in consciousness, through a willingness to meet this moment exactly as it is without the overlay of resistance and judgment and should-be differentness, you step out of the victim position and into your power as a conscious being. Not power over your circumstances, because many things in life remain beyond your control, but power within your circumstances, the power to choose your relationship to whatever arises, to meet difficulty with presence rather than resistance, to engage with challenge as an opportunity for deepening rather than as evidence of failure. And this power is not something you need to manufacture or develop. It is what you are, the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. This power is not something you need to manufacture or develop. It is what you are, the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, always present, always available, waiting only for your recognition. But the recognition comes with a price, and the price is the death of who you thought you were, the dissolution of the carefully constructed identity that has been navigating life through strategies of control and protection and achievement. This identity, this sense of being a separate self that must constantly manage and manipulate experience in order to survive and succeed, is what creates the feeling of stuckness in the first place. And so liberation from stuckness requires not strengthening this self, but seeing through it, not improving it, but recognizing its fundamental unreality. This is where the teaching becomes truly radical, where it asks something of you that goes beyond anything you have been prepared for by your conditioning. Because everything in your life up until now has been oriented around building and protecting and promoting this sense of self, this me that has preferences and aversions, goals and fears, a past to defend and a future to secure. Your entire psychological structure is organized around the assumption that you are this separate entity moving through a world of other separate entities, trying to get what you want and avoid what you don't want, trying to make your life work according to some internal template of how it should be. And now Krishna comes along and says this whole enterprise is based on a fundamental misunderstanding that the self you take yourself to be is not your true nature, but a kind of dream, a convincing but ultimately illusory overlay on the infinite consciousness that is your actual being. He is not saying you don't exist. He is saying you exist as something far vaster and more fundamental than the limited personality structure you have identified with. That the real you is not the one who feels stuck, but the awareness in which the experience of stuckness appears and disappears like clouds in an empty sky. This teaching can sound abstract, philosophical, disconnected from the concrete reality of your daily struggle. But it is actually the most practical thing you could possibly hear, because as long as you remain identified with the limited self, you will continue to experience stuckness no matter how much your circumstances improve. You will simply find new things to feel stuck about, new ways to experience the gap between what is and what should be, new evidence that you are not yet where you need to be. The structure itself generates suffering, and no amount of rearranging the content of your life will address the fundamental problem of the structure. But when you begin to question the structure, when you start to investigate whether the self you take yourself to be is as solid and real as it appears, something begins to loosen. Not because you have solved a philosophical problem, but because the investigation itself creates space, introduces doubt into what was previously taken as absolute certainty. You begin to notice moments when the sense of self softens or disappears altogether, moments when you are so absorbed in an activity or a conversation or a sunset that there is no one there experiencing it, just the pure experiencing itself without a separate experiencer standing apart from it. These moments are glimpses of your true nature, brief openings in the cloud cover that reveal the clear sky that was always there. And once you have tasted this, once you have experienced even for a moment what it is like to be without the burden of self-consciousness, without the constant monitoring and evaluating and comparing, you can never quite believe in the solidity of the separate self in the same way again. You know from direct experience that it is possible to exist without it, that consciousness does not require this structure in order to function, that life can unfold with perfect clarity and responsiveness without anyone there trying to manage it. This knowing changes the game entirely, because now when you feel stuck, you have a reference point outside the stuckness, a dimension of your being that is not caught in the problem. You can begin to ask not, how do I get unstuck, but who is it that feels stuck? And this question is not meant to be answered conceptually. It is meant to turn your attention back toward the source of the question itself, toward the consciousness that is aware of the feeling of stuckness, toward the witnessing presence that remains untouched by whatever it witnesses. When you rest in this witnessing presence, even for a few moments, the whole landscape shifts. The problems don't disappear, but they lose their absolute quality, their power to define your entire reality. You see them as events arising in consciousness rather than as the totality of what you are. And from this perspective, you can engage with them much more effectively because you are no longer so emotionally entangled with the outcome. You can take action without the desperate energy of someone trying to save themselves, without the contraction that comes from believing that your entire worth hangs on whether this particular problem gets solved. This is what Krishna means when he speaks of performing action without attachment to the fruits. He is not asking you to stop caring about outcomes or to become passive and indifferent. He is pointing you toward a quality of engagement that is wholehearted but not desperate, fully committed but not identified, caring deeply about the task while remaining rooted in something deeper than any task. And this quality of engagement is only possible when you have touched the dimension of your being that is prior to all doing, the stillness that makes all movement possible, the silence from which all sound emerges and to which it returns. But how do you access this dimension? The question arises again, and again the mind is looking for a technique, a practice, a method that will guarantee the result. And there are practices that can help, practices of meditation and self-inquiry and devotional surrender that create conditions favorable for this recognition. But ultimately, what is required is not more doing, but a willingness to stop, to become so still and quiet inside that you can notice what is already here beneath all the noise and activity and striving. You can notice the simple fact of awareness itself, the consciousness that is reading these words right now, the presence that has been with you through every moment of your life, unchanged by all the changes, untouched by all the experiences you have labeled as good or bad, success or failure, progress or stuckness. This awareness is not something you need to achieve or attain. It is what you are, what you have always been, what you could never not be even if you tried. The spiritual journey is not about becoming this awareness, but about recognizing it, about waking up to what has always been true but was obscured by layers of conditioning and belief and identification with the limited self. And this recognition is both the simplest thing in the world and the most difficult. Simple because it requires nothing but looking. Difficult because everything in your conditioning pulls you away from looking, keeps you focused on the content of experience rather than the context, on the waves rather than the ocean, on the movement rather than the stillness that contains all movement. So the practice, if we can call it that, is to keep coming back, to keep remembering, to notice the awareness that is noticing everything else, to keep asking who or what is aware of this feeling, this thought, this sensation, this sense of stuckness or freedom or anything else that arises. And each time you ask, you create a small gap in the identification, a momentary loosening of the grip of the separate self, a brief opening into the spaciousness that is your true home. Over time, these openings become more frequent, more stable, more accessible, even in the midst of difficulty. The center of gravity of your consciousness begins to shift from the changing content to the unchanging context, from the personal self to the impersonal awareness that witnesses the personal self without being limited by it. And as this shift occurs, your whole relationship to the experience of being stuck transforms. You begin to see that what you called stuckness was actually just a particular pattern of thought and emotion arising in awareness, no more solid or permanent than any other pattern, no more defining of your true nature than a passing cloud defines the sky. You begin to recognize that you are not stuck in your life, but rather consciousness itself, temporarily identified with a story about being stuck, and that this identification can be released not through effort, but through simple seeing, through recognition of what is actually true beyond the story. This recognition does not announce itself with fanfare or dramatic revelation. It arrives quietly, like dawn, so gradual that you cannot point to the exact moment when darkness became light. One day you notice that the familiar weight of stuckness has lifted slightly, not because anything external has changed, but because you have stopped feeding it with your attention, stopped reinforcing it with your belief in its solidity. You notice that you can hold the experience of difficulty without collapsing into it, without making it mean something absolute about who you are or what your life will be. You notice that there is space around the problem, breathing room, a quality of openness that was not there before, or perhaps was always there, but you could not see it through the density of your resistance. And in this space, something new becomes possible. Not new in the sense of novel or unprecedented, but new in the sense of fresh, immediate, unmediated by the accumulated weight of past conditioning. You begin to respond to life rather than react to it, to meet each moment with curiosity rather than with the predetermined conclusions of the mind that already knows what everything means and how it should be different. This responsiveness is not something you do. It is what happens naturally when you stop doing so much, when you stop trying to control and manage and fix everything, when you allow life to move through you without the constant interference of the self that thinks it knows better than reality itself. This is the flowering of wisdom that Krishna speaks of, not wisdom as accumulated knowledge or clever insight, but wisdom as a living quality of being, a natural intelligence that arises when the mind is no longer clouded by fear and desire and the endless commentary of thought. This wisdom knows what to do without needing to figure it out, responds to each situation with perfect appropriateness, without needing to consult a rule book or follow a strategy. It is the wisdom of the body that knows how to heal a wound without being told, the wisdom of the heart that knows how to love without needing instructions, the wisdom of consciousness itself that knows how to be without needing to become. And you discover that this wisdom has been operating in your life all along, beneath the surface noise of your thinking mind, guiding you through countless situations that seemed impossible at the time, bringing you to exactly where you needed to be even when you were convinced you were lost. You begin to trust this deeper intelligence, to recognize that it is far more reliable than the anxious calculating of the ego that is always trying to secure some future outcome, always trying to prevent some feared catastrophe, always trying to maintain control over an inherently uncontrollable reality. You begin to understand that what you called stuckness was often this deeper wisdom putting on the brakes, stopping you from moving in a direction that was not truly aligned with your deepest nature, protecting you from choices that would have taken you further from yourself even as they appeared to be progress by conventional standards. This understanding requires a complete reorientation of how you evaluate your life, a willingness to question the metrics you have been using to measure success and failure, progress and stagnation. You begin to see that what looks like forward movement from the perspective of the ego might actually be sideways or even backwards from the perspective of the soul, and what looks like stuckness or delay might actually be exactly the pause you needed, the gestation period required for something genuine to emerge rather than something merely manufactured by will and effort. You begin to trust the timing of your life, to recognize that there is an intelligence orchestrating events that is far beyond your conscious understanding, and that your job is not to force things into alignment with your limited vision, but to align yourself with the larger unfolding that is already happening. This does not mean becoming passive or fatalistic, surrendering your agency or your responsibility to engage with life. It means discovering a different kind of action, one that arises from presence rather than from anxiety, from wholeness rather than from the sense of something missing that must be acquired. When you act from this place, your actions have a different quality. They are more effective because they are not distorted by the desperate energy of someone trying to escape their present reality. They are more creative because they are not limited by the narrow parameters of what the conditioned mind thinks is possible. They are more sustainable because they do not deplete you in the way that action driven by fear and lack inevitably does. You begin to notice the difference between action that comes from stuckness and action that comes from presence. Action from stuckness is frantic, forced, accompanied by a quality of internal pressure and urgency that makes everything feel harder than it needs to be. It is action designed to prove something, to achieve something, to finally arrive at the place where you can relax and be okay. Action from presence is relaxed, natural, arising spontaneously in response to what the moment requires, without the overlay of personal agenda and self-concern. It is action for its own sake, complete in itself, not dependent on any particular outcome for its validity or worth. And here's the paradox that the mind cannot grasp but experience reveals, that action from presence is far more effective than action from stuckness, precisely because it is not attached to effectiveness, not driven by the need to produce a particular result. When you are not clutching at outcomes, you can see more clearly what is actually needed. When you are not defending a position, you can respond more flexibly to changing circumstances. When you're not trying to prove your worth through achievement, you can focus your energy on the task itself rather than on what the task says about you. The irony is that the things you are trying to force into being through sheer effort often begin to unfold naturally when you stop trying so hard, when you create space for them to emerge in their own time and their own way. This is what it means to align your will with the divine will, to surrender your personal agenda to the larger intelligence that is moving through all things. It is not about giving up or giving in. It is about recognizing that your deepest desires are not actually opposed to reality, but are expressions of the same creative force that is animating the entire universe, and that they will be fulfilled not through your anxious manipulation, but through your willingness to participate consciously in the unfolding that is already happening. When you stop fighting against the current of your life and learn to swim with it, you discover that it was always carrying you toward what you most deeply longed for, but by a route you would never have chosen, through territory you would have avoided, in a time frame that did not match your impatient expectations. So the feeling of being stuck begins to reveal itself as a gift, a necessary crucible in which something false was being burned away, something that needed to die so that something more true could be born. You begin to see that you were never actually stuck in the way you thought you were, that what felt like paralysis was actually a kind of sacred pause, a moment of not knowing that was essential preparation for a deeper knowing, a darkness that was not the absence of light but the womb in which new light was gestating. And this realization does not come as consolation for past suffering, but as present moment clarity that transforms the suffering itself, that allows you to meet even the most difficult periods of your life with gratitude rather than resentment, with trust rather than fear. This is the transformation that Krishna points toward, and it is available to you right now, not in some distant future when you have finally worked through all your issues and become sufficiently evolved, but in this very moment through the simple willingness to meet what is actually here without the filter of resistance and judgment and should be different. The pathway forward opens not when circumstances change, but when you change your relationship to circumstances, when you stop demanding that life conform to your preferences and start showing up with presence and curiosity for whatever life is offering right now. And so we arrive at the deepest layer of this teaching, the place where words begin to fail and direct recognition becomes the only true guide. You have heard now that stuckness is not what you thought it was, that the forward movement you seek is not found in the direction you have been looking, that the liberation you long for is not a destination but the recognition of what has never been bound. But hearing is not the same as knowing, and knowing is not the same as being. There comes a point where the teaching must be lived rather than understood, where the concepts must dissolve into direct experience, where you must step off the edge of everything you have been told and discover for yourself what remains when all the stories fall away. This is the moment you have been both seeking and avoiding, the moment when you must stop reading about freedom and actually taste it, stop thinking about presence and actually be present, stop analyzing consciousness, and actually rest as consciousness itself. And this moment is not somewhere in the future, not waiting for you at the end of some long journey of preparation and purification. This moment is now, always now, eternally now, because there is no other moment in which anything has ever happened or could ever happen. The now that you have been postponing, the now that you have been treating as an obstacle to overcome on your way to some better future now, is the only portal through which transformation is possible. Krishna speaks of this with perfect clarity when he says that the wise see action in inaction and inaction in action, that they have transcended the duality of doing and not doing by recognizing the consciousness that is prior to both. This consciousness is what you are being invited to recognize, not as an idea, but as your actual lived reality, the ground of your being that has never been touched by any experience of stuckness or movement, failure or success, bondage or liberation. It is here, closer than your breath, more intimate than your heartbeat, and yet it cannot be grasped by the mind that reaches for it because it is what is doing the reaching, the space in which all reaching occurs. So how do you recognize what you already are? The question circles back on itself, revealing its own futility because the one who asks is not separate from what is being asked about. There is no distance to cross, no gap to bridge, no transformation required. There is only the willingness to stop, to become so completely still that the activity of seeking itself is seen as the very thing that obscures what is sought. In this stopping, this profound and total cessation of the forward momentum that has defined your entire life, something is revealed that was always present but never noticed, like the silence that contains all sound, the stillness that makes all movement possible. This revelation is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with cosmic fireworks or mystical visions. It is the quietest thing in the world, so quiet that you have been missing it your entire life precisely because you were looking for something more impressive, something that would validate your sense of yourself as a seeker on an important spiritual journey. But what is revealed is that there is no seeker and there never was, only seeking arising in consciousness, only the play of apparent separation and return, only the divine forgetting itself so that it can remember itself again, over and over, in infinite variations, through infinite forms. And you, my dear friend, are one of these forms, one of the countless ways that consciousness has chosen to experience itself, to know itself, to celebrate its own existence through the adventure of apparent limitation and the ecstasy of realized freedom. The feeling of being stuck that brought you to this teaching was never a problem to be solved, but an invitation to look deeper, to question the assumptions that make stuckness seem real, to investigate the nature of the one who feels stuck until that one is seen through completely, and what remains is only the pure seeing itself, the awareness that has no qualities, no characteristics, no story of being stuck or unstuck, lost or found, broken or whole. This awareness is your true nature, and it is also the true nature of everything and everyone you encounter. When you recognize it in yourself, you simultaneously recognize it in all beings, and the sense of separation that created so much suffering dissolves like morning mist in sunlight. You see that you are never alone, never isolated, never truly separate from the source of all that is. You see that the entire universe is nothing but consciousness playing with itself, taking on countless forms while remaining always and forever the formless ground from which all forms arise and to which they return. Living from this recognition does not mean you become perfect or transcendent or beyond the reach of human experience. You still feel emotions, face challenges, encounter situations that require decision and action. But you meet all of it differently, from a place of profound okayness that is not dependent on circumstances, from a peace that passes understanding because it is prior to understanding, from a love that has no object because it is the very nature of what you are. And in this meeting, the question of whether you are stuck or moving forward becomes irrelevant, revealed as a conceptual overlay on a reality that is always complete, always whole, always perfectly itself, regardless of what appears to be happening. So the invitation in this final moment is to let everything you have heard settle into silence, to allow all the words and concepts and teachings to dissolve back into the wordless knowing from which they emerged. Close your eyes if you wish, or simply soften your gaze, and notice what is here when you're not trying to get anywhere or become anyone or fix anything. Notice the simple fact of being, the undeniable presence that is reading these words, the consciousness that has never been absent even for a single moment of your life. Notice that this consciousness is not affected by whether you feel stuck or free, that it remains unchanged by every experience that arises within it, that it is the constant background against which all change occurs. Rest here for as long as you can, not as an exercise or a practice, but as a homecoming, a return to what you have always been but forgot in the excitement and drama of being a person in a world. And when you open your eyes again, when you return to the activities and responsibilities of your daily life, bring this recognition with you. Let it infuse your actions, color your perceptions, transform your relationships from the inside out. Let it be the silent knowing that underlies everything you do, the secret that you carry with you through all the apparent ups and downs of human existence. And remember, whenever the feeling of stuckness arises again, and it will, because that is the nature of the conditioned mind, that you now have a choice you did not have before. You can believe the feeling and collapse into it, or you can recognize it as another wave arising in the ocean of consciousness that you are, another temporary pattern that will pass like all patterns pass. You can meet it with the same presence you would bring to any other experience, neither grasping nor rejecting, neither inflating nor denying, simply allowing it to be here, to move through, to teach you what it has come to teach before it dissolves back into the emptiness from which it came. This is the freedom that Krishna offers, not freedom from experience, but freedom in the midst of experience. Not escape from life, but full participation in life without the burden of identification, without the weight of personal history and future projection, without the constant commentary of the mind that thinks it knows what everything means. This freedom is your birthright, your true inheritance, the gift that has been waiting for you since before you were born, and will remain waiting long after this body returns to dust. It cannot be earned or achieved or won through struggle. It can only be recognized, accepted, lived. So live it now, in this moment, in whatever way this moment is asking you to live. If action is required, act without the desperate energy of someone trying to escape their present reality. If rest is required, rest without guilt or the feeling that you should be doing something else. If confusion is present, be confused with total presence rather than fighting against the confusion. If clarity is present, act from that clarity without needing to preserve it or make it permanent. Whatever is here, let it be fully here. And in that total allowing, discover the spaciousness that was always here, the freedom that was never absent, the love that has been holding you through every moment of your journey, even the moments when you felt most alone, most stuck, most certain that